In September of 2013, unprecedented rain flooded 6 different river corridors, causing destruction to homes, businesses, and more than 400 miles of Colorado highways. In 2022, the Colorado Department of Transportation finished the final permanent repair project from the floods. This is the story of building the road to resiliency. The rains that would eventually spawn the 2013 floods started on September 9th, a Monday. Steady rain continued throughout Colorado. 2 days later, the storm front parked over the state and began dumping more rain on already saturated ground, turning calm rivers into raging giants.
Major event happened in the state that we haven't seen in our lifetime. We had water coming up from the south, winds coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, and they collided over the mountains. And when you take water and energy and push it against the mountains wring it out. And all that water falls out of the atmosphere and ends up on the ground. And that's what created the floods of 2013.
For example, here in Boulder County, 9 inches of rain fell on September 12th alone. The yearly precipitation for the year is 20 inches. So they received almost half of their yearly precipitation in one single day.
It was raining for, I think, 2-3 days at this point, nonstop, and things were just, you can almost feel a restlessness with the weather, and bad things were about to happen.
And I could see immediately on the looks that people were giving me, something big had happened. And that's almost immediately as I reported in that next morning on the 12th. I'm getting calls from US 34 Big Thompson, up Boulder Canyon, all the way out in Kersey on US 34 that direction. The calls are coming and coming and coming and coming, and they did not stop. That's when it hit all of us that we were in the midst of something unprecedented.
I think when I got my first radio call at Highway 119 and just off of I-25 there, and saw the wall of water coming down the St. Vrain River and the calls that were coming in subsequent to that, I kind of figured this was going to be a big deal. That's when we started mobilizing. I think anybody that was awake and had a pulse at the time was mobilized at that time.
Then on Saturday, it was much worse than it had been on Wednesday and Thursday when the initial damage hit. And I came up here on Sunday morning, and the road was completely impassable about a mile up from the mouth of the canyon. There was a box culvert that was blocked with a bunch of debris, like storm culverts from driveways, and then also a motorboat was standing vertically in front of the culvert. So that caused was the entire river got out of its banks because it couldn't get through the culvert, and it just ran down the middle of the road and completely washed out close to a mile of the road in that segment.
My next call was further north to Highway 66, and just outside of Lyons, where the cement plant up there, their railroad tracks were just hanging in midair from all the water that had come through there.
The first couple days at that incident command center, seeing some of the photos, and then also just honestly, the look on people's faces and the amount of time that they were putting in and the amount of hours, you could tell that this was something different.
I think the 4 a.m. call just put me on notice, but when I started actually looking at some of the damage and conversations with people in Region 4, it became totally obvious to me that this was a huge event.
Following late-night frantic phone calls and news reports from around the state, CDOT employees who were working on other projects had to change on the fly to react to the devastation.
So we knew it was going to take some big repair, so we got Josh Lapley, who was the chief engineer at the time, to sign an emergency declaration. And I think we got that signed on the Friday before the skies really opened up on Saturday.
When we started to see the visualization of just the pure destruction of what happened over that course of those previous 4 days, that's when you're almost taking a gut shot going, how are we going to organize this operation to successfully bring back our communities?
Those first days were very, very hectic, very chaotic. You had a lot of resources that were kind of going all directions at once. But eventually we became focused and got together and got going on the same path here.
Floodwaters destroyed roads from the mountains to the plains and from Fort Collins south to Colorado Springs. A total of 486 miles of roads and more than 200 bridges were closed. Even Interstate 25, the backbone of the state, was not spared.
You know, the water is going over I-25, you know, topping I-25 with those bridges and then just filling that whole Thompson, I think it's Thompson Crossing, that whole area, just seeing that entire valley underwater.
In my wildest dreams, I never would have thought I-25 would have been shut down for a flood. But given the volume of moisture that we collected in that short time, the water had to go somewhere, and it found the lowest spot, which happened to be right there on I-25.
Floodwaters carried east and blew out levees near Evans that flooded entire neighborhoods, which included the offices of CDOT engineers and Colorado State Patrol.
The scene behind me was a building underwater. You know, right behind that tree there would have been a nice two-story office building over there. It was the nicest one in Region 4 at the time. We called it the SoCo building. We also shared it with the State Patrol at the time. And it was beautiful. We had this adjacent park area over here. The river isn't far away, and it was just a very idyllic place to work. And it went from that to just being ruined. It's a little overwhelming, to be honest with you. And you know, people in my unit had suffered loss of their cars. We were without an office, so we were kind of going from place to place like a nomadic tribe of engineers. It's overwhelming. I mean, the devastation, and here, up close and personal, you know, this is a neighborhood that we worked in. So all these people around us, they all suffered tremendous loss.
Some of the most destruction was on US 34 in the Big Thompson Canyon, which brought back some terrifying memories of the flood that hit the same canyon in 1976.
We were closing down Highway 34, working from the dam store backwards. As more and more water came down the Thompson Canyon here, we had to start cutting off access and roadways and keep people from going westbound here on Highway 34. It was amazing, the volume of water, the amount of damage, and the minimal amount of loss of life in this one. If you compare the 76 flood, which only covered a 20-mile span, versus this one, which covered almost 200 miles. 76, we had 114 people, I believe, or more killed or unaccounted for. And in this one, I think we had 6 to 8.
The extent of the flood was massive. Figuring out what to do next was baffling.
You go through your entire career thinking that you have everything under control, and then something like this happens, and being the program manager of the ER program, I had no clue what I was doing to start off with.
First thing that I got was a call from Johnny Olson, who was our former RTD of Region 4. He calls me up and says, hey, you know, we've got a pretty serious situation going on, and I think I'm going to set up something called the Incident Command Center, or the ICC. And I'm like, awesome.